Platonism, basically, is what we're doing.
Yeah,
Good.
I guess like it's kind of going into I suppose we could kind of talk about the meat of Neoplatonism, especially when it kind of comes to what it means to be Neoplatonist, and maybe a bit more what how relevant Neoplatonism actually is today, and whether we should look at it as something that should be more mainstream rather than just kind of like this fuddy-duddy religious side reel, you know what I mean? So yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, so that's what we'll say we're doing.
Yeah, no, sounds good to me.
So so start off by giving us, let's say, first of all, you're using your real name here, is it Daniel Alexander?
No, it's half my real name. Okay. I'm not using my whole full name, but yeah. So I mean, people probably know me on Facebook by the name Fashovic, which is a very old name. I made that name long ago. I also kind of more mainstreaming towards using the name Apotheosis or Apotheism.
We'll start with a summary of your beliefs. What's a summary of your beliefs?
So ultimately, I'll just call myself a Neoplatonic Hellenist, in the same vein as Emperor Julian, who very much focused on a Neoplatonic Hellenism. And I guess you could say that it's ultimately a belief in the gods, a belief in the Hellenic gods. It's about a perennial spiritual understanding of religion. But it doesn't necessarily mean that all religions are 100% correct. It's more about what religion has, I would argue, to be the most accuracy, so to speak. And that's where I find that expressed within Hellenism. A kind of like Hellenism that's very much a exoteric religion that everyone follows, and no one has a really deeper understanding of what the myths mean and what's to be interpreted from those. And ultimately, when you say a Neoplatonic Hellenism, you're giving it like a nuance, or not a nuance, but more of a like expression that you're using it in a sense that you know that there's this underpinnings of theological thought, which you obviously derive from Plato, and then the developments from him. So you could probably express it in multiple different ways. I mean, obviously you've got Christian Neoplatonism, but when you have Pseudo Dionysus, who pretty much kind of fully adopts the Amblichus's structure and stuff like that. So not to say that they're the equivalent, but you know.
So it's like you came to Hellenism through philosophy, you might think. Is that a way you might say it?
So I think it was very similar to you, in that I first bought Plotinus. I bought the Enneads, and this was ironically, funnily enough, the way that I ended up getting to Plotinus was because I was looking into the history of Catholic theology, because I was looking to convert into Catholicism.
Were you?
And so I was looking at the history of Catholic theology, and that's where I found Neoplatonism, and I found Plotinus. So I bought the Enneads just out of curiosity as to see what it was all about. And to begin with, I was like, what even is this? It's just ridiculous to try and read. But once you like power through it, and you realize, oh, hang on, maybe I shouldn't be reading this from beginning to end, but you have to read in a particular sequence and all this kind of stuff. You realize just how much reason and like rationality was invested into Neoplatonism that you find it very hard to even disagree. Like it's not something that you can be like, oh, that sounds like fuddy-duddy, stupid religious beliefs or something like that. You have to actually argue with it.
Exactly. It's not just like a doctrine of like, you must believe this and some kind of crazy story. There's none of that. It's all just like analysis of the world, let's say, laid out. So let me ask you.
Exactly.
So you were converting to Catholicism from what? From atheism or Protestantism or?
Yeah, so I was brought up a Pentecostal Christian. Those in Australia would know the church, maybe even abroad. I was brought up in Hillsong Church. So if that doesn't mean anything to you, thank God for it.
Is that that's not one of the more like
Happy
fundamental
clappers?
ones. Are they? So they're not okay. They're not the ones that think you're like burning in hell because you're not.
Oh no, well no, they're like they're just very happy clapper. Like they play music and they have a band and blah blah blah. They're very big, but I think they're more famous in Australia and somewhat America, but they're not so big.
I've heard about it in America. All right, yeah, Pentecost, yeah. So but, what? Let me just say, what spurred you into the initial Catholicism?
So I ended up becoming atheist when I was about like 18. And I blame Pentecostalism for that entirely because there's no instruction or depth of theology or anything like that. It's just utterly superficial. So, but then I ended up becoming, looking back into Catholicism after I had a pretty rigorous bunch of arguments with a friend of mine who convinced me that there was a God, with all of the kind of arguments to do with that. And primarily kind of on the basis of like the complexity of the world and how much order there is and stuff like that. And so from there, I started looking at naturally kind of Christianity because I was just, that's kind of your tendency when you come back to believing in God. You're like, oh, well, I guess that must mean that Christianity is correct. But I couldn't go back to being Pentecostal, which completely lacked any real fundamental basis. And I found that Catholicism's teachings had it was a very convincing kind of spin to it, like the way that they would use philosophy and stuff like that to try and talk about different things, and obviously all of that's Neoplatonic in the end, but I didn't know it was Neoplatonism. I just thought it was Catholic theology. But then I did eventually find out that it was Neoplatonism, and this was as I was kind of leaning into becoming a Catholic. That's when I started, looking into Plotinus. So that's basically that whole journey. I did lose a lot of friends waiting away from Catholicism, but
you did? Did you?
Yeah,
really? Yeah. Because I was raised Catholic, but I haven't lost friends over any. So they were really like they were really true believers then. Obviously that they couldn't.
Because I guess like in Australia, like no one's really raised Catholic. I mean, some people are, like obviously, mostly Irish descent people are, but most people are not really raised Catholic. So the parish that I was going to, everyone was generally like a hardcore, like they're very much Catholic. They're not just,
right. Yeah, the converts really take up the.
They take it very seriously.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. I can't really recognize the converts from the Catholics I knew growing up. It's like something else. But
there's always this distinction between like the cradle Catholics versus the convert Catholics, and they're very different.
Yeah. Okay, so that's very interesting. So you like me, you were like exploring, but I noticed that too. I remember reading Thomas Aquinas, and is there some kind of building going on here? There's like
sorry, let me close the door.
No problem. What was I saying? Yeah, I remember and just reading through that and getting into any of the parts where they started to make rational arguments for God. It was very mathematical, and it wasn't anything to do with you must believe this passage from here. It was all just like laying it out. But you're right. That all came from Neoplatonism in the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Over. And they expanded some of it too. They did. Some of them did a good job. All right, but all that.
Like I don't hate on Aquinas that much. No. I think he did a reasonable job, and ultimately, no one can say that he's dumb at all. No. Like, there's no way anyone could argue that. I think Aquinas is pretty good. I much prefer Plotinus's way of writing. Like even the most like challenging translation of Plotinus, I still find to be there's something like poetic about Plotinus where you know, he kind of what's the word? Even when he's like doing out like all of his dialectic, but then he somehow always like manages to slip in some kind of like very poetic description of what he's talking about. It's very nice.
Yeah, it is very nice. Yes, I truly admire that as well. Yeah, he would have been great if he was nowadays. He would be like the ultimate Twitter person because he could make it short and sweet. He'd give you like 2 sentences, and you'd read them, and you'd be like, "Oh, wait a minute," and you'd like go back. So I just read that, and then you like focus on it again for a while. Like you're like, "Oh my god," and like so, and like and a real economy of words too, and doing it. So,
well, it's always amazing with the ancients how like. I mean, obviously they're translations, but they still had to be like a compression. Well, actually, that's said like even in the ancient Greek, it's actually shorter than it is when it is translated. But like the richness of words that they could use to like convey their meaning so concisely, but so like
straight,
so richly.
Like there's no bullshit. It's like
it's amazing. I find that the most amazing whenever I read Sallustius, like it's only like I think 13 pages long, but like he just writes like just so much within so little. It's amazing.
Yeah. So so it was through a conversation you had or an argument you had. You got argued. So you first became an atheist from probably watching like whatever what's his name, Hitchens videos, or those guys or something.
It's kind of like I had a stupid clown understanding of God. That's why. So.
Okay. So this guy convinced you. You tried to become a Catholic, and in reading Catholic theology, you got inspired to. You somehow heard it was Neoplatonic, and you read Plotinus, and then
that's right. Yeah.
And then that set you off on the new path. Yeah, that's not far from the way it was with me too. Although I'd already read Plato, and I was already. I mean, when I read Plato when I was young, I read The Republic and a few other things when I was 18 or something out of interest. They didn't teach us at school. Maybe other people get it taught at school. I don't recall getting. Well, we got.
Yeah, I don't get.
We got the history of Plato and Socrates, but we weren't like given the text just to read. Yeah, so it profoundly influenced me, and I felt changed ever since. Like when I read it, and I was like, wow, because you get into these things, and when you're that age, anyways, you read something like that just because I'm going to read the classics because. Just
you feel smart.
It makes me feel like Mr. Smart Guy. But then you're actually, it affects you, and you're like, oh, and then like you're profoundly affected and changed. So I always remembered about that. But it was only like I don't know when I read Plotinus, less than 10 years ago, 6 years ago. Can't remember now. That was like the same thing all over again. I was like, okay, this is really something.
I always say that like the book that pivoted me towards a different kind of understanding of the world and stuff like that was always Plotinus. Like and Plotinus continues to be like it's essentially like my Bible. Whenever it comes to anything, you can usually find answers to things in there. And when you reread stuff, you end up learning new things all the time. It's great.
Yeah. So you decide. So what made you decide to go full bore into Hellenism then, and not just be like a Catholic Neoplatonist, or
So ultimately, I guess without having to hack onto Christianity too much, the basis of it really was. I mean, I guess at a very basic level with Neoplatonism, it kind of opened my eyes to the realization that maybe Christianity, the Christians were not the only smart people in the world, and that maybe that actually the pagans of the old days were not actually as dumb as I thought they were. Because I was brought up with this understanding that before Christianity, basically everyone was a big idiot. And they had really stupid conceptions of the God of God in general. And they thought that, he'd come down and rape women and blah, blah, blah. Everyone would know what I'm talking about. And it was suddenly like within like Plotinus, because I mean, like just to emphasize, like I had a very kind of like, within the education, at least in Australia, the way it's kind of taught to you is that, Plato was a very smart person, but he didn't really believe in anything. He was more of kind of
Yeah.
he was almost an atheist
Yeah.
in a sense. Like he just believed in
That's what they
philosophy.
say. Yeah.
Which is so ridiculous because you actually read it and it's so obvious that he's just constantly God, 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 God. Like he does not stop. Everything always ends up relating to the good and stuff like that.
No,
So
you're right. It wasn't. I don't know if that's the way they taught us, but I remember just getting a lesson about him, but they add a caveat. But he was flawed, and obviously didn't quite know what we know, and this kind of thing. They didn't say. I don't remember them trying to say that they were atheists, but so much as as though they didn't have an understanding like we had. And then you go back and read it firsthand, and it's like, my God, their understanding of the world is far surpassing ours.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I kind of like realized, like, because to begin with, obviously, once they've dissociated the philosophers from the religion of the time, which they still constantly try to do, they try to always say, Plato was a hard distinction from the locals. He was nothing like the Hellenists, blah blah blah, because they want to continue this motif that that religion is always dumb, or at least religions that aren't Abrahamic. So but from discovering that, hang on, well, I'm reading Plotinus and he wasn't a Christian and his theology is extremely complex. It's not simplistic at all. It worked like an awareness in me that, oh, hang on, maybe these people weren't so dumb. So that's when I started looking into it more and started researching. And I guess one of the biggest things for me was that with Plotinus, because everything of Plotinus is reasoned out in a dialectical way, that it becomes very difficult to try and say that he's wrong. And I honestly have not once encountered a situation where I've seen someone argue something that has actually shown Plotinus to be wrong at any time. Like I cannot, like I literally cannot think of a time that I've had that.
I can't think of anyone even trying.
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing. People just generally avoid it entirely. I would love for Christians to try and criticize it because I want to see the criticisms.
They could probably latch onto his. Well, he was critical too of astrology, but he had respect for it, I guess. But
yeah, his understanding of it was kind of that it had efficacy, but if you're directed entirely by it, that means you're being directed too much by fate and not by your own will.
That was it. Yeah.
But like I found that like understanding this kind of new like dimension where the pagans aren't entirely stupid. I found that you couldn't really fault some of his arguments, and one of the big things is the way that Plotinus sets out the hierarchy of being, where you have the one, and then, I mean, depending on your translation and which words you use, you could be the more Stephen McKenna translation, which is like, Stephen McKenna, where he goes, like you have the one, and then you have the intellectual principle, and then you have the soul. And because it was a very like hierarchical, step-by-step kind of establishment where you have the one as the absolute hierarch, and then you have the inferior and then the inferior, and that the intellect itself was it had itself as a unity, but then had a multitude underneath that, and then the soul had a multitude underneath that. You kind of realize that by the rationality of Plotinus, you couldn't really be a monotheist, because there had to be gods that had not just simply like angels where they were like messengers of God, but they had to actually be like demiurgic creators of the world, because that is how the structure necessitated it. And that's where I kind of realized, well, it doesn't seem that the Christian understanding of God held up to this understanding of God that I found so convincing. So I guess that was kind of like my beginning into like a polytheistic understanding, where I believe that there were gods, and that they had roles in the earth and stuff like that, but roles that they hold from the hypercosmic. But so I guess that's kind of, well, that's why I went specifically towards polytheism. But then Hellenism, primarily because now I'm not Greek at all, so it's definitely not like a very ethnic thing, or not Latin descent either. I'm primarily, I think, Scottish and then English. So I don't see it as an ethnic thing at all. At least in it's definitely European, but not ethnic in that sense. But I guess Hellenism, particularly Greco-Roman Hellenism, which is I always take it as a Greco-Roman thing, not specifically just Greek or specifically just Roman. Mainly because I find that the synthesis of the two together makes a very complete religion, with each having their own unique gods, but I find together they make a very good complementary.
And everywhere they went at the time when they were, having their empires, they strongly influenced everywhere, everyone, and everywhere they went. So
exactly,
it was,
so I think that because a lot of because we have such a rich amount of knowledge and texts from that period of time, I think that when it comes to religion, it's probably the most complete of the ancient religions, in that we know basically everything about what they believed and what they did and stuff like that. We're lacking, unfortunately, in the rituals, the specific rituals, and we're lacking in knowledge of the mysteries religion. Naturally, we should not lack the knowledge of the mysteries, considering they were mysteries. But
that really sucks. That really pains me.
Yeah, it's the worst. It makes me so upset. But but other than that, we have basically an entire knowledge base that we just simply don't have with pretty much any other European religion.
That's I live in Ireland, and so I have, let's say, Irish pagan friends, and I go with them. I join in with them, kind of doing rituals and things, because to me, I do think sort of syncretically about it all. I just think there's you can sort of you can name these forces whatever you like. It's really your own way to interpret them, and so in that way, it doesn't bother me. But even them, or even some of the other sort of pagan groups, generally refer to the Greek as the most complete system whenever they have gaps, and and they have many gaps. They always come back to that anyway. So privately, I just go straight for that, because just like you, it was just what affected me. I read it and it totally changed me, and I was like, well, this, I'm all for this. So I inside, I always am going with that. But, it's also, as you say, you have to piece together things, and like the Irish myths, especially, they're very unique and strange. It's not like the Nordic or any of the other ones. They're very interesting, and you feel drawn to them. It's very strange and and compelling. It resonates, let's say, in a way that I guess Christianity, certain elements of Christianity can sort of resonate, but it was always a bit of a hard slog. But
I mean, with Christianity, I find that within it you find some parts of it which resonate, and ultimately, I believe that it's because Europeans, in our adoption of Christianity, we integrated a lot of what we believed into it, and a lot of the myths, even a lot of the legends, a lot of the saints have stories which are basically directly derived from ancient myth. And so naturally there is this kind of within Christianity, whether it be Catholicism or Orthodoxy or whatever, you're very much kind of drawn to those kind of stories and those understandings of the world, which ultimately our history is very much built upon that as well, and it's the history that we have recorded.
There's not much hugely compelling in it, though. It was always a bit lacking for me. I don't know about you.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, a lot of the things that I found, I guess not so. I wasn't too hot about was in Mass, which is now said in English, rather than. But I went to what is it called? I forget the name of the rite, but it was a very kind of high English rite. But basically it was the Mass itself I found to be kind of depressing, in that I never really it was because the way that they talk about you is in the most kind of dismissive and very belittling way, where almost half of the Mass is just prostrating yourself before God and how terrible you are. and then the other half is just praising him for coming to save such a wretched, worthless, piece of trash. Like, so
with me, it wasn't like that. Let me just say you're bringing it back to me now, because I also went, and even still, I might go to a Latin mass once in a while, just because it's the last remnant of a living ritual that we have. Even though I would like to begin a new one, and I'm planning on doing it pretty soon here, actually. But just to get it in like a Latin mass, because even then, like when you go, and that's like the special mass that they all love. But of course, it's in Latin. They're using the Roman language, and they're using so many of the Roman, like a lot of that ritual is left over from quasi-Mithraic or other, rituals that were developed in mystery cults from ancient times. So you're getting the last taste of that, let's say. But it was mostly just like the names and stuff, like these. You're supposed to be. You're not supposed to be there. You're not supposed to be rooting for the Romans when you're hearing the story in the mass. But I sort of would. I'd be like, And
I mean, like you've got like
the names of the saints and the this and that. It just sounded. It did not resonate. It sounded like foreign, dare I say. There's a lot of talk about Israel, and it's just all.
Well, no, exactly. It's very much we're kind of like focusing around a cult of like a foreign cult, essentially. Not to use, obviously, I mean, probably your viewers would know this, but like not to use the word cult in a very like horrible way that it's known today. But like in the very more general sense, like it's definitely a cult of the Jews. And I mean, for them, it's fantastic. Like I like you look at like, because at the very least, when I look at like Judaism, because I do a lot of study of their theology and their disciplines just out of the curiosity, just because of how relevant it is. And like at the very least, I could say that like I'm envious of that they have managed to keep it all for so long.
That
and
is
it's like and not having that is like just because it's like in Israel you have like Kabbalah schools. They have literal schools where people they would send their sons to, who would learn about the mysticism of Judaism and learn about the Kabbalah magic and all this kind of stuff. But it's like, well, why don't we have that anymore? Like,
but why would you do have it? So like I do think a lot of it is in the ritual, like, and it's there. Like even say the fact that they're speaking Latin, you get the nice music. Just the things that seem irrelevant, the incense and the architecture, and everyone gets dressed up and going through the throes of a ritual and having it, and I think that maybe that is even without having the actual mysteries. Maybe that is that's the initiation. That's the important part, is following the rules of the ritual. The ritual itself is like all important. So you can, even if you can reconstruct a ritual, even if it's new, but it has all those elements of mystery, I guess, and you're sort of observing the eternal truths. If you thought it out really well, and you're, maybe it's fine in a way. Like maybe that is the important part.
I mean, I guess maybe from a communal perspective, I think that the ancients definitely had a higher union with the gods that we just totally lack today. Even honestly, probably even the earlier church itself, like Aquinas has mystical experiences that I would attribute to miracles that would be from the divine. And we also have like we have so many cases in Europe's Christian history of miracles, and people would probably think, oh, wouldn't that kind of defeat your case that Christianity is wrong? But not exactly, because ultimately the fundamental place for the human is in seeking a higher union with the gods, or what you could call God.
There's the baggage of Christianity. There's a baggage of stuff involved in it, and it's also now very corrupt.
And
time is over.
I mean, ultimately, like, because the thing that I always say is I reference Rome's doctrine, I guess you could say, of Pax Deorum, and that being the harmony of the gods, and it's always about facilitating the entirety of society's harmony with the gods, and it's through that we have positive providence. And the Greeks had the same understanding. They just didn't have a specific term for it, but they had the exact same understanding where the state actively had to be involved with the harmonizing of society with the gods. And it's through that we get the providence. And I think that Christianity, while it has a lot of the baggage, as you said, at points in time, it did actually achieve this harmonization, because the gods, like, not to say they don't care, but it's not like the gods are going to restrict their providence because you're not calling them the right thing. Like the providence, because the entire universe is within the gods. It flows out almost, I wouldn't say automatically, but as a kind of like the likeness likes likeness. So if society has a likeness to the divine, the providence will flow out to it no matter what religion or whatever it is. It's just ultimately religion is important because it controls your conventions and your understandings of things, which is why we need to focus on religion. But on a very
that is really maybe the core secret of the mysteries of any mystery cult, is that you can't explain it really. It's like you just have to do it and follow it, and then, as you say, it'll come through you and express itself in the corporeal reality.
Yeah, I mean,
only through, and it's unexplainable. You just have to like follow it and go with it.
Really. My view is that, ultimately the mysteries have to come from somewhere, and I honestly believe that it can be recovered. I just think that it just won't be recovered by just anybody, and it needs to be recovered
a prophet
through, like, essentially a kind of theurgy or ritual itself, which ultimately you don't have these experiences if you don't do ritual. So it kind of, as you said, like, it requires kind of just doing it and seeing where providence leads you. But because the only reason why I say that is because Amblicus, which I think I mentioned to you before when we were chatting on Twitter, Amblicus says that the daemons were the guardians of the mysteries, and
right.
And it's them that impart rituals. Like, if you were to contact your personal daemon, they would impart a ritual to you to summon them, and it would be a particular specific ritual just for you. And so I think that there is a potential that they will impart the mysteries again. However, I think the only context within which that would happen is when a group has actually cultivated Pax Deorum within themselves.
That's very good.
Which is something that will have to happen eventually, which is something I hope will happen and something I pursue. But
that's good.
But yeah.
Good, yeah. That's excellent. Yeah, no, this is the work that has to be done.
Exactly,
So let's move on here. So what would you say is the imperative of Neoplatonism? Or maybe you've said already, but
I think that I think the big thing, which is like, this is kind of like falls into my broader worldview, is that Amblicus talks about there being Amblicus, and on top of that, we also have I believe it's Porphyry, I think it is. I can't recall if it was someone else, but then there's also a series of other philosophers. And finally, actually, also Swedenborg, who's a Christian. He talks about like a class of daemons who have a responsibility to bind souls to the cosmos, where it's these kind of downward trending daemons which always involve themselves in trying to entice and continue to pull souls back down towards the cosmos. Now, this obviously ties into reincarnation or metempsychosis. It's kind of where obviously after this is where we first get it from Plato within Hellenism, maybe even Pythagoras, I think. I can't recall. And naturally also the Orphic mysteries. The understanding where there's a reincarnation cycle where you die and then you come back again, and the whole idea is that you're supposed to eventually break that cycle of reincarnation and achieve perfect union with the gods. So so that means that there's these daemons who want to actively try and bind your soul to the cosmos. They want the reincarnation cycle to continue. So my understanding is that when, like, for example, Abacus says that when you go into a theurgic ritual, there are multiple levels to the divine realm or to the spiritual realm. And so there's these layer of daemons which are what we consider to be the evil ones. They're not evil, so to speak, because everything has their role and has their purpose, but we call them evil because they make us do what we don't want to do. And they are the kind of distractors. Like when they talk about them within the ritual, they're always taking on forms that would be a distraction to us. So, like, for example, if you were in a theurgic ritual and you weren't properly prepared, the demon might present himself as like your long lost mother or someone who's died recently or something like that, and try and engage with you, pretending to be that person, and perfectly as well. It's not like this that they because they manipulate matter, they know exactly how to replicate this. They know how to behave like them and stuff like that. So, and for most people, I'd imagine that would be a perfect distraction, because it's like, oh, this is this person I've long lost and missed or whatever, and they will believe that it's actually them. And this is why we have a lot of cases where people seem to believe they talk to Jesus and they believe they talk to Zeus, or they talk to whoever. It's because these initial layer of daemons, they communicate using these forms and essentially pretend to be whatever it will be that will entice you to talk to them, to engage with them. And that's the first layer of essentially distraction. But I think there's also another layer where they have an active engagement with the world, which naturally they must, because they're material, the material focused daemons. So they can manipulate matter and stuff like that. Their focus in the world, I believe, comes down to generating religions and followings that result in a continuous reincarnation cycle. Like, for example, there's in Zoroastrianism, within Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and there's another one, I forget its name, but within these faiths, within, I think, Gnosticism as well, in a sense, depending on the Gnostic religion, though. It's not all of them, because it's just to say Gnostic is so broad. There's an understanding that there's going to be this reincarnation of the body, and that you will be given a perfect body within the new cosmos that's created by God. That's within literally all of the religions. Because you read like Zoroastrianism, and you read how it details that the Sayashan, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly or not, but it's essentially like their Messiah, who comes and brings peace to the world by finally conquering the evil, and they renovate the cosmos and resurrect the dead, and give them new perfect bodies. So essentially, you have that same kind of motif in Christianity, where, Jesus returns, resurrects the dead, and there's a final judgment. And then also in Islam, there's this final judgment. And in Judaism, there's also, it's not, I don't think it's a final judgment, but there is a resurrection of the dead, essentially. But funnily enough, that the Judaic mysticism believes in reincarnation. It's a very, very weird kind of adaptation that they have, but they actually do believe in reincarnation. But it's very weird.
That Kabbalah stuff or whatever.
It's part of Kabbalah, yeah. But these different faiths have this kind of understanding that there will be this destruction of the current cosmos and the recreation of it. And the way that I've come to understand it is that this is essentially kind of like daemons trying to convince us through the good of the cosmos to continue to return to the cosmos. And the way that they do this is by spinning kind of this tale of where re-embodiment into the cosmos will be a good thing. It will be a perfection. It will be your perfection when you come back again, when we recreate it again and stuff like that. And rather than the kind of understanding within the old mysteries religions where you're trying to break away from reincarnation and you're trying to achieve union with the gods, this is a very kind of material thing where it's like, oh, you're going to be in a new world. You're going to be part of this new cosmos. And considering the fact that, within Neoplatonism, we would say that the world, the cosmos is eternal, and that there's also this kind of evolution and then involution where there's this departure from singularity and then return to singularity through a continuous cycle, you would know that there is kind of this recreation. There's this new world that's created, but it's not any more perfect or less or even more imperfect or anything like that than the previous cosmos that just came before it. It's this continuous evolution because we need that cycle if we want to return to the gods eventually. But in order so that we can, build up our wisdom and build up our knowledge of the gods. But ultimately, it's like the demons have a understanding of this. They know that this happens, but they want to convince everyone that it's actually a good thing that when the involution back to singularity comes, that you would hang on and continue again and to continue through this cycle.
So you think the imperative of Neoplatonism is to resist those demons? Is that
absolutely? I think that the goal of Neoplatonism is that it puts everything into its right place. It has a hierarchy and it understands everything. It in the sense that it knows where things ought to be. So, for example, like in Amblicus, he talks about how there are these daemons that you would encounter within theurgic ritual and stuff like that. And that they're just dumb daemons. They don't have any intellect or particular will. They're like, I'm using dumb very kind of loosely, but the reason why he talks about this is because he was asked why are you commanding daemons within the theurgic ritual? Doesn't that seem to be a breaking of the hierarchy? Because apparently this is what they did in the ritual. The person leading the ritual would command daemons, either to disperse or whatever like that when they're doing the ritual.
Right.
And so from that, we can deduce that there's this understanding of hierarchy that would be normally lost on people. Like that the risk of these particular daemons is that because they don't have any particular will, but they act upon you anyway. If someone doesn't know that they can command these demons because they're sitting higher in a hierarchy, they're going to fall victim to them all the time. And especially because it's such a daunting kind of world to be, partaking in the spiritual realm, you kind of assume that you're always at the bottom of the pile, that you're kind of just being acted upon and that everything just kind of happens. But in reality, you're sitting within a hierarchy, and that there is actually a place for us to be involved within that hierarchy. And so I think when we have a conscious understanding of the hierarchy, we're able to place things where they should be and appreciate them for the good that they have. So then we can know that these particular daemons who want to bind us to the universe, we can know that there's a good in what they do because, that's ultimately their purpose. They're part of the process of bringing soul down. But we also need to also know about the daemons who want to bring soul up and work with those, and then bringing ourselves towards the higher echelons of divinity and stuff like that. But without having a conscious understanding of all of that, you essentially fall flat. And which is why when you have religions that essentially garbage and trash the hierarchy, you basically are completely cut off and denied that process.
Right. So you think ultimately then it leads to a union with the gods somewhere like far down the line? And
absolutely. Yeah.
What about virtue and vice then? What's your...
So virtue is, as per Plotinus, as you probably know if you've read it, virtue is kind of like a means towards becoming like God. Plotinus starts it off by quoting Plato with his seeking likeness to God. And I find it's a very it's a very challenging kind of notion, because it's so easy to identify within yourself where you fail. And it kind of sucks when you constantly remind yourself, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But there was one particular quote that I also love from Plotinus, where he's talking about virtue. I'll quote it in a minute. But basically, virtue is essentially about conditioning your soul as being the master of the body. Where now naturally, the Neoplatonists share a common understanding with Aristotle and Aquinas, where they understand that the being is like a hylomorphic being, where soul is entwined with the body, and they're not to be like a dualistic state, but rather a unified state. But they're still acting within body, the soul. And the soul needs to be the commander of the hierarchy rather than body being the commander of the hierarchy. So everything that tends towards body is naturally going to be your vice, and everything that tends towards soul is going to be your virtue. And as Plotinus says, the soul is a divine being. It's not anything of the cosmos. So when we're seeking likeness to God, it's essentially kind of like seeking likeness to your own God, so to speak, trying to build up your own divinity. And so the way that I always kind of understand it is always seeing is whenever I want to do something, or whether I want to, eat something, or want to, go out and do something, whatever it is, I always, the way that it's easiest to challenge yourself is this something that a God would do, or something a God would need? And most often no, it's not. Like Plotinus obviously puts.
I usually measure it by like this. Like I try to push my limits of pain, let's say, or ignore pain as much as I eat. Like Plotinus mentions that quite a bit, and pleasure, try not to be overly indulgent and stuff like that. And that's the way I think. I'm not sure how you can know or think of yourself towards being what a god would do.
It's more like about having the status of self-perfection and self-efficiency. Right. Naturally, right. Plotinus gives all the caveats of saying, obviously, don't starve yourself to death. Like, he says all this. Like he lists like, if you really do need to have sex, have it with your partner. You don't have to, completely abstain from everything. And become like a saint of abstaining. But he does say that like it's a matter of kind of thinking like, as a God that's needless and self-sufficient and self-perfect, does a God need to, for example, go out drinking and get absolutely wasted? No, a God doesn't need to do that. A God doesn't feel any compulsion to do that. Does a God feel it needs to indulge in, chocolate every day? No, a God doesn't need to do that. The God has no impulsion to indulge in anything. Indulge in any of the goods of the world and stuff like that.
Yeah, see, I have a certain, let me just say this though about that, because I've said this before and I'm not sure I can really explain this. I have a certain, like, I would agree with Plotinus about all that, but I do have a certain kind of even almost more traditionally pagan outlook where I would agree with like Nietzsche even, where like there's a certain, if you look at it towards it as a kind of conquest in a way, where a man, providing he can in the reverse face and intentionally seek as much pain as he can, that certain pleasures, if you look at them in as an attitude of conquest and will, to a certain degree, are not to be indulged in, but to sort of like see that as a challenge as well. Sometimes I think of it this way, but that's not very Neoplatonic of me at all.
I think that like I know that within like Neoplatonism, like the understanding is more if you can conquer the pleasure, then that's when you can enjoy it, so to speak. So it's like like if you're in control, it's kind of even that's kind of like a god, because a god fulfills the goodness of itself, of him or herself, through a self-conquest, so to speak. I think Plotinus even uses the term, at least within the translation I have, of like self-quest. And it's kind of like because of this perfect self-conquering, essentially it means that they can enjoy all of the goodness of everything as in their state, but it doesn't allow the goodness of everything to control them.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's the distinction.
I'm talking about just like fulfilling a routine That's which really, like, a real bad addict is really like following a routine. It's the same as wasting your life, even say at a job that's nothing but a routine, like, on a assembly line or something. That's kind of like the ultimate evil in a way. If you're not making an adventure out of everything you do, and like having that spirit of ascension in everything, leading to something, trying to get better all the time or create new things. I think that's the great sin.
Exactly. And on top of that, I think that people should be cautious, cautious not to bash themselves too much, because naturally not everyone's going to be the sage. Like, I'm definitely not the sage. And this doesn't necessarily mean that, you're denied from godhood. Like, it's a matter, that has more to do with, like the thing is that with Amblicus, like, the way that he would talk about it is that the whole purpose of theurgic ritual is to achieve your perfections. And generally speaking, he didn't believe that it was possible to do so without theurgic ritual. And that if you weren't interacting with the spiritual realm and achieving your perfections, which, whether that might be conquering a vice that you have or something like that through the help of the spiritual realm, then he didn't really view it as possible. So if while it would be very admirable, I think, to look at someone and be like, wow, you've really conquered your vices completely, and you're not affected by anything. Fantastic, good work of self-discipline, and I'll applaud that. But at the same time, beating yourself up over it because you don't achieve that absolute height is definitely not something that someone should do.
No.
So, and just to quote Plotinus, because I love this quote, I always quote it. This is him talking about, this is from On Virtue, and this is him talking about, the matter of trying to struggle towards virtue. It says, there will be no battling in the soul. The mere intervention of reason is enough. The lower nature will stand in such awe of reason that for any slightest movement it has made, it will grieve and censure its own weakness in not having kept low and still in the presence of its Lord, the Lord referring to the soul. In all this, there is no sin. There is only matter of discipline, that our concern is not merely to be sinless, but to be God, which I love quoting this because
it's great.
It's really like, it's a strong contrast between the Neoplatonic ancient understanding of virtue and the Christian understanding of virtue, where for the Neoplatonists, virtue isn't something that you do because you want to please God and you want to try and prevent sin in your life, but rather it's entirely a matter of producing the self-discipline within your soul of having the virtues. And it's not always about, God being nitpicking over your particular faults and all this kind of stuff. It's entirely within yourself and about perfecting yourself.
And it's also that reminds me how much he talks about reason, and reason is the ultimate, is the state of the gods, is like a plane of pure reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, supposedly, not, he doesn't, I don't think he says it, but beyond the plane of fire is the plane of pure reason, which is which is the godly realm. Which is then, so that whenever you're observing reason absolutely and as much as you can and closely as you can, then you're heading towards that virtue. And I mean, that's something that you don't have in Christianity and a lot of others. They don't even talk
100%.
about. Yeah, like reason is. Sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say, like, this is very much like what Plato kind of sets out from the beginning, is how essentially philosophy itself is virtue. And that contemplation, which is what Plotinus focuses on, contemplation, is itself virtuous. And that the very kind of discussion, that the idea that you would seek the gods through discursive reasoning and try and find them through the theology and the dialectic that Plotinus has set out for that in itself is virtuous, and to be reasoned is virtuous. So 100%.
Yeah, so that's as close as we can come to, maybe for now, which is surprising. The imperative of Neoplatonism. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that as well, but
like
it does boil down to that reason and the material world, and observing the eternal inside yourself, which is your sense of reason, and in some ways what you can get from your daemon, let's say your instinct.
Like and I mean, like when I guess you think of like the it's this kind of imperative, like I always come back to Pax Deorum, especially when it comes to the imperative in the real world. Like, because obviously, like the ancients saw Pax Deorum as the absolute necessary thing, and it even comes to the case of the Oracle of Delphi talking about how when the Christians were, they were becoming quite popular in the empire. She even says that her ability to perform the oracle was decaying and was degrading because of the impiety of the Christians within the empire. And it kind of shows that, like, even though she herself was no doubt being entirely pious, that didn't stop the effect of everyone else around her who was being impious having an effect on her. And I think this is kind of like a very strong challenge to us, I think, because, we like to kind of think that we can take our own AWOL path and, seek our own kind of end. But unfortunately, we are partaking in a species, and that species has a soul, and that kind of has a requisite on us to try and encourage people as much as we can to move towards wanting to observe a Pax Deorum within themselves and within society, which is something that I find to be strongly impressed upon me, to try and fulfill that end, at least to the best I can within my life. But yeah, like,
do you have plans for beginning a ritual? Can I ask, or like a public?
Yes, but not something that I set out as like having milestones that I plan to achieve within the next, however many days, or however many months. But it is something that I feel that I'm working towards always.
Me too. Yeah, one of us will have to start it, and hopefully everyone won't agree. They'll be like, it'll immediately schism, whatever. But anyways, gotta try.
No,
so
I think
at the end of your list, we made a little list of our questions here. So imperative of Neoplatonism. The last one is mythology. So I don't know what you want to say about that.
I guess want to kind of remark on like the importance of myth and the poetry that we've received from the ancients. Like, I spend a lot of time, and people often ask me about interpretations of myth. And I think that there's a lot of like hidden secrets and hidden theology that is lying just underneath the myth that we know and the myth that we have, that is just waiting to be kind of revealed and to be found. And so I guess what I wanted to really emphasize with that kind of point is the truth there is in interpreting myths. And this is something that's, for some extremely stupid reason, is a controversial thing to do in the pagan sphere, specifically because you have some particular I won't name who. There's some particular groups who have a very literalist understanding of mythology, and who take very hard stances on these things, and they only hurt themselves by doing so. Not only do they not actually observe how the ancients understood the myths and understood the gods, they also make themselves look stupid in front of Christians and other people who, would look at them and think, well, that's a load of nonsense. I'm not going to pay any attention to it. And so I wanted to emphasize that there is actually truth in myth and in interpreting myth, and to try and define the undercurrent, the kind of like the truly esoteric knowledge that hides within it. And so, but naturally, of course, everything should be approached through philosophy. Celestius is who says that the myths are good in that they inspire people to do philosophy. And so I think that when we approach these things, when you have your understanding of Neoplatonism, try and find the motives within myth, and try and find, what's being referred to. Like, for example, like whenever like epithets are used, or when there's descriptions of gods, pay attention to what they're talking about. Like, for example, like Zeus the cloud covered, sorry, for example, is a Zeus that is being described to be like very, very hot, like upper in the sky. So you could say that's like a hypercosmic Zeus, as opposed to Zeus the Thunderer, which is a far more immanent and cosmic Zeus. So just as like an example of how they can use descriptions to set out a theology. And it's the same case whenever they do a theogony, which they tend to do quite a lot within poetry, where they talk about how this god comes is a daughter of that god, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is describing the nature of the god that's being used within the poetry. And this is why like people seem to think that all of the myths contradict, and that there's these different these different parentages of different gods and goddesses. But what's actually being done is a deliberate explanation of the nature of the god that they're talking about. I guess what I wanted to emphasize was kind of more just like to be willing to kind of look at it from a different angle and to see the importance of myth, but to also be conscious of how myth has these key kind of like hints within it, trying to tell you about what they're talking about and what they're referring to and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah. And you do have to, you have to be careful. I mean, even with, there's no human that did anything that was 100% perfect or that you'll agree with 100% of the time. So when people try to be super literal about everything, and I know, the likes of Homer and Plato, you don't want to question, but there's always, in everybody or anything, you can find a little bit of fault, because they were ultimately human. They were interpreting things through inspiration, and there'll be some, I don't know, even fault is the word, and there's always going to be also dichotomy and paradox a little bit as well, and that only actually aids in the mystery in a lot of ways, and even strengthens things, I find as well, but that's something else. But
like for example, like one of the paradoxes that usually confuse people is that there's these two natures of Zeus. You have Zeus, which is the leader of the fates, and then you have the Zeus.
It's tripartite Zeus. There's three really. I thought, isn't there not?
Oh yeah. There's Zeus is a very complex god. Actually, you've got like a triadic Zeus that stands above all of the gods, but then you also have the tri-Zeus of Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. But then you also have Zeuses that come underneath that. But like you have, like, for example, one of the big things that confuses people often is the Zeus, which is the leader of the fates, and then there's also the Zeus which is compelled by the fates. And that's kind of contradictory, because it's like, well, how is it that Zeus leads fate but then also can't control fate? And the reason for that is that it's explaining a difference between the Zeus which stands as the hypercosmic, which is above fate, and then you have the Zeus which acts within the cosmos. So the Zeus that's the leader of fate is not a cosmic Zeus, but a Zeus that's essentially, you could say, like as being entirely beyond the cosmos. It's not a cosmic Zeus. So when we're talking about that Zeus, we're talking about powers that go beyond the cosmos. But when we're talking about a Zeus that's influenced by fate, that's a Zeus that's more in cosmic, that's more immanent to us, and it's talking about the powers within the cosmos, because cosmos is directed by fate. So when we see something like that, it's very strongly an indicator of like what powers is the poet talking about within this particular context. And so that's always something that I look to when I want to try and figure out, like, what am I looking at? What am I interpreting? It's always kind of those key, like, even sometimes it almost seems like the poet just throws in this almost entirely irrelevant story about just some kind of side thing. And it's almost entirely like within the context of the story, it's like, why did you even put this in here? And it's basically, it's always because they're trying to convey to you, I'm talking about this God in this particular way. I'm not talking about it in any other way. So it's like that a lot, I think, in the Iliad, where they kind of have these like these jumps towards like what the gods are doing. Sometimes it's kind of like, why are you talking about this? It's like, but it's really much because they're trying to emphasize like what their theology, what's the theology they're trying to convey in that moment, Homer in that particular time. Which I think is why they always, like, when the ancients talked about the Homer, they always talked about the divine Homer, and they even called him a theologian sometimes. And it's very much because his myth, while excellently written in poetry was actually theology as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd agree. But even in that case, like say some of those parts. I mean, Homer was relating a story that was like from antiquity to him, that was passed through oral tradition. You know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Even at that time, so there'd be parts of it that were, naturally morphed and evolved through this transition, and through that would be sort of naturally strange or would have lost original meaning or altered. But it all is part of the thing and the plan, anyways.
Yeah. I mean, I think that they were very divinely inspired people,
Yeah,
and I think that
and even those weird bits that seem out of place in the end make it all more human and natural and organic. You know what I mean? Like it would say in the modern sense, like we have these dead stories, these myths, these Disney stories that are perfect from start to finish with everything leads to the climax, and it's you know what I mean? But it's dead. It doesn't have life. It doesn't have life. So
it's not lived. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So that's great. Yeah. So that covers mythology. So let's finish with, although you've kind of already said, but we'll say anyways. How do you see Neoplatonism as being relevant today? Okay, so that's Pax Deorum and piety.
Yeah, like I guess that was kind of the Pax Deorum kind of stuff, but like ultimately I think that I mean my hope is that I'll eventually end up writing out to I hope to write a book one day, but
yeah, you should. You do, right? You could almost put it together a book of your.
Yeah, like I mean,
you did a lot of
I've had people ask me to do that. I did compile something. It was actually quite like a couple hundred pages long, but I haven't published it anywhere yet. I have to edit it. But
yeah.
the basically, I really hope to see one day that there will be a like an actual kind of religious, like active religious outreach to try and convince people back to moving towards Pax Deorum, and to give them, but like specifically what I find is often lacking is this kind of like having a rigid understanding of what I'm actually supposed to be doing. And now naturally I don't want to be like overbearing. It's not like it's going to be like Catholicism where if you don't go to mass you go to hell, but but it's more like if people often are begging me to have some kind of like structured understanding of what they believe in and what they should think about things and stuff like that. And I think having that mainframe within which people can kind of come to and come to understand what they believe and what they should know about the world and stuff like that. I think that would be very important for actually trying to spread this kind of beyond being a novelty of the internet, so to speak. Like unfortunately that's kind of what it is at the moment. Like every single group that exists is almost entirely bound by this kind of string of international people who don't really know each other besides through the internet. It needs to kind of evolve beyond that and become local communities.
That's why I think if it started with even if it was online at first, started with a regular ritual, then next thing you know, maybe not next thing you know, but eventually the step beyond that would be temples and hierophants, I think. Eventually.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
No,
so that's how it's relevant, I guess. So yeah, but so how is it relevant to the individual person and to society? Let's say so.
So I guess I kind of like, especially from like a societal level, I guess I mean it always comes back to Pax Deorum. That like all of the mystical kind of like the very mystical understandings of the past, the miracles that they had, the miracles that we continued to have for a long time, even well into the 19th century, we were still having records of miracles, but then also like much of the kind of like because I take these things very like to be very real. It depends on the person. Some people think it's a lot of nonsense, but I think we only think it's nonsense because we don't experience it anymore. But if we want to bring the kind of like the divine back into the world and into what we live, there is very much an imperative on us to try and achieve that end of Pax Deorum. And that means that ultimately we will need to try and encourage that among everyone we know, essentially, which is kind of the focus that I've had. but yeah, like I guess, but there's also other imperatives. I guess if you that's focusing on the religion side, but I also think that there's a lot to be advanced within science. If we were to try and discard the extreme empiricism that we rely upon, where we're constantly building bigger and bigger tools to just look at things rather than trying to think for ourselves. We're just like, oh, we'll just build an even bigger, big collider, and we'll just see what happens when we smash things together. Like it's very very lazy science.
I do think it would be a way. It would be a way into a new set of values that would be sort of a morph of values. Some values we have remnant of now, and very archaic values, and that would be a good thing. I do think there would be a change in values, as you say, to sort of have a rational spirituality like that, where reason is at its peak virtue. Yeah, but you're right though. You would morph around your goals scientifically, otherwise would change, and we need that kind of change. It's definitely stagnant the way it is.
100%. Even like everything, like literally, there's not one area today that isn't stagnant.
No, it's all dead.
Like when it comes to culture, it comes to art, it comes to everything. It's like it's just dead.
It's dead.
Like you can even see it like when we're remastering and redoing movies like religiously now, we like it's like people want everything to just be redone, where we go look at back like, oh, here's Milan, let's turn that into a live action, why not? Or here's Avatar: The Last Airbender, let's turn that into a live action.
But everyone knows they can't do it. They know that the best they can hope for is to be reminded of something that was good before.
Yeah. And even that, when they had a winning formula, they can't even repeat that. Like
no, they can't do anything. Yeah, so the whole value structure has to be changed. So that's why the universe is compelling us to do this. I think, hopefully, and other people that can see this kind of thing, and this is the only way to do it. That's what other people don't maybe cop on.
Yeah.
That if you start from this point of view, tapping into the hidden world, let's say, then you got nothing.
100%. No, I agree with that entirely. So I think that would be if we can achieve that in the next couple of weeks, that'd be great.
Couple years.
Yeah, no. But I find it like, I mean, there's definitely a lot of interest that's being kind of almost like, it's almost like a miracle how much interest is just being self-generated out of everyone in like Neoplatonism. It's almost like it came out of nowhere. And I think that's great.
Yeah, lately it seems to be really on fire. I don't know why, because I've been into it for a while, but all of a sudden I noticed like last couple months, maybe longer, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think there's definitely a yearning for more that is slowly boiling over.
Yeah.
Very slowly, but happening.
Yeah. So anyways, we'll keep trying. We'll keep doing what we can in this rotting corpse.
Yeah.
But, that was good. So thanks for coming on and telling us all the ins and outs. And
no worries. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll do it again, maybe on a more specific topic, because that was quite vast.
No, 100%. No, it'd be good to go in depth into a specific.
Yeah. So
are you on Telegram?
No, I did start one, but I didn't get into it.
Fair enough.
I can only cope with so many social media things. I'm
the same.
Yeah. Maybe, I mean, like people often ask me that. Maybe I'll go on there again. But anyways, you know how to reach me, and we'll
no worries.
Keep working towards the goal.
Awesome.
And good stuff. I'll talk to
you. All
right.
Awesome. Thanks. Cheers. See you later, mate.
Bye.